Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Rebecca Brown. I'm the ESSER Program Manager here at OPI, and I'm here to talk to you today about E-Grants and ESSER Grant challenges or errors. This is going to be kind of a mile wide and an inch deep summary of the common questions that I've received over the last month. We have offered some more in-depth guidance and training on these subjects before, but I will try to address the ones that I've seen most recently. Next slide, please. On this slide, you'll see contact information for both myself as well as Wendy Fawns. Wendy is the ESSER and EANS Director for the state of Montana, and I am the ESSER Program Manager. We can answer any and all questions that you may have about the ESSER grants, and if we don't have an immediate answer for you, we will work to get you an answer as quickly as possible. So our emails and our phone numbers are there on the screen. Feel free to contact us at any point. And we will begin today's session. In the chat before we jump in, please type and let us know whether you have previously contacted Wendy or myself. Let us know, was that through a phone call? Was it an email? Was it an in-person conversation? I know that I have been able to meet and talk in person with a few superintendents and clerks in Montana. So I'll give you just a minute here to type into the chat. And then at any point throughout today's session, if you have a question, please feel free to put it into the chat, and I will either address it when it comes up or I will address it at the end. Just so that you are aware, there is a 15-second delay between when you post your chat and when I actually see it. So if it feels like I'm ignoring your question, I probably just haven't seen it yet, and I'll address it when I do see it. So again, please type into the chat. Let me know if you have talked with me or Wendy before, and I'll just jump right in. This session is going to be, like I said, a mile wide and an inch deep. We're going to cover a lot of different aspects of E-Grants and the ESSER grants, including some common questions that I've seen or issues that I've seen over the last about month. And then at the end, I'll give some OPI resources and we'll wrap up, and then we will have an open question and answer session. So if you don't want your question answered during the presentation, then you can wait until the end, and I'll do specific question and answer then. Next slide, please. So with E-Grants, we're going to just start at the top. How do you log into E-Grants? There's two ways that you can go to E-Grants. You can either use the OPI website. There is an E-Grants link under Leadership, Finance and Grants, and then E-Grants. It's being pointed to by that big yellow arrow there on your screen. The other way is you can use the direct link. These slides are going to be posted on the OPI website. And that link there is a hyperlink, so I encourage you to click on that link and then bookmark it in your browser, so that you can just go straight to E-Grants and you don't have to click around on the OPI site if you don't have to. Then once you get logged into E-Grants, once you click on that link and you go to the E-Grants login page, there are some important resources, helpful resources and tips and tricks on that page. There's a few of them pointed out here with these little yellow arrows. We have an announcements section where we will give you timely information about what is going on with the E-Grants program. My biggest example here is when we do have to take E-Grants offline to make any maintenance updates, things like that. That will be posted in that announcements section. For example, this happened in September. E-Grants was offline for a couple days while they were doing maintenance. So that'll be posted on this page in big red letters. And then the information section has some helpful information for you. The most common way that I see this being used is we have a contact page there for everyone related to grants that are used in E-Grants. And so that is in that information section. And then the last section here is the training section. And we have some step-by-step manuals and booklets that take you through how to do certain aspects of E-Grants. So there's some helpful resources on that page that I encourage you to take a look at. Next slide, please. Once you get logged into eGrants and you open up a grant, there is a contact information tab. This contact information tab is how we, the program managers, get in contact with you. When you open up this contact information page, you may notice that the contact information isn't actually correct. And I want to emphasize here, the contact information is captured in your grant when the grant gets submitted. So for example, the ESSER 1 grant, ESSER fund, was opened up back in 2020. And it was probably submitted by your school or district back in 2020. So that's been almost 3 years at this point. And in that time, you may have had some transition in your superintendent or your clerk or business manager, and that contact information may not be accurate anymore. That doesn't mean that you, the current person, do not have access to eGrants. All that means is that contact information was captured way back in 2020 when the grant got submitted. If you look at this page and it isn't accurate, there are ways that you can update your contact information so that on any new grants that get submitted, it'll be your contact information instead of the previous person's contact information. You'll use some aspects of eGrants as well as updating OPI contacts, which you can see on this next slide here. In this slide, I'm not going to go through all of this text. We have gone through this in more depth previously. These resources are on our website and they are also in eGrants. But when you need to update your contact information, there are two ways that you do it. You need to update the contact information in OPI contacts, which is our database that's used for eGrants and all contact information like the compass that goes out, those big newsletters, things like that. So OPI contacts is the first place you update your contact information. And then the second place is within eGrants. That security access can be modified by the district clerk or the authorized representative, depending on what needs to be changed. Instructions are on this slide, as well as more in-depth user guides on the eGrants page, as well as on our website. Next slide, please. After you have verified that your contact information is correct and you have updated it if you need to, the next thing that you're going to probably look for is where to find specific grants. So the ESSER grants specifically can cause some confusion on this front. Right now, it's November 2022. We are sitting in fiscal year 2023. And when you open eGrants, it opens to the current fiscal year. When you are looking for your ESSER grants, those ESSER grants are not located in fiscal year 2023. The ESSER 1 grants are located in 2020, and then ESSER 2 and 3 are in fiscal year 2021. So when you first open eGrants, those grants will not display, but that doesn't mean that they are gone. All you need to do is select the correct fiscal year, and it'll take you to the right spot where you can see your ESSER grants. Next page, please. Then once you get into your ESSER grants, they differ in where the budget pages are located. Back when ESSER 1 came out, we didn't know that there was going to be an ESSER 2 and an ESSER 3, and so the ESSER 1 grant is laid out a little bit differently than ESSER 2 and 3. And then the ARP summer and the ARP after school grants are also laid out differently. So here's those differences here. On the left side of your screen, you can see ESSER 2 and 3. Those are consolidated grants. They have multiple budget pages. And in order to navigate between the budget pages, you'll go to the top right-hand side of your eGrants application, and there is a drop-down menu. You'll click on the drop-down, and then you'll be able to see all of your budget pages, which you can click on and pick which one you're going to look at. In ESSER 1, ESSER Fund, or ESSER-related services, as well as ARP Summer and ARP After School, those grants do not have multiple budget pages. It's only one budget page. So instead of having a drop-down menu, they just have a budget page in the blue tabs at the top of your eGrants application. So you'll just click on the Budget Pages tab, and it'll open up that budget page for you. So that's an important difference that I've gotten a couple calls on, and that's all right. Next page, please. The next thing that I want to point out is the payments menu. I have gotten the question before, where do I find how much I've already spent on ESSER? I can see how much I've budgeted, but I don't know how much has been spent out. And you'll do that by going to the payments menu. So when you're in that E-Grants Access Select page, that's that main page where you can see all your grants, what you will do is you'll click on the payments button next to the ESSER grant that you are looking for. And what it'll do is it'll open up this payment summary menu that's on the right-hand side of the screen right now. If we could zoom in, I'm going to point out some parts of this payment summary. You can see going down, there's several different sections of this payment summary menu. It starts out with the allocation, so you can see how much you were allocated. And then the next two sections, anticipated payments and pending payments, those would be payments such as cash requests that have not been approved yet. So if you submitted a cash request, but it hasn't been approved and it hasn't paid out yet, then that dollar amount would show up here in this section. Then down below that, there are completed payments. That's how much money has already been paid out through cash requests. And then all the way down at the bottom is remaining payments. Now, this screenshot was taken from the ESSER Fund grant. That's the ESSER 1 grant that expired in September 2022. So that grant is done, and the remaining payments in that grant should be $0. But for example, if you were looking at ESSER 3, that one doesn't expire until 2024. And so you'll probably have some remaining payments in ESSER 3, for example. So there's that tab. And then if you want to look at cash requests specifically, let's go to the next slide. You'll click on the blue View Cash Request Payment Expenditure Reports button, and that'll take you to this other menu where you can see all of your cash requests and or expenditure reports that have been submitted for that grant. Now, for the ESSER grant, only one expenditure report gets submitted at the very, very end. So usually when you look at your ESSER grant in this menu, you won't see any expenditure reports, but you will see cash requests. And you can see here, I've circled both of those sections so you can see the differences between them. And I will say, now that we are at the end of ESSER 1, you do need to submit your final expenditure report for ESSER 1. That is the last step in order to close out the grant. And you have to close out ESSER 1 before you can move forward with ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 at this point. And then if you want to look at a cash request specifically, so here they're all listed out and you can just see cash request 1 was submitted on this date and it got approved on this date. But if you want to look within a cash request and see exactly what was spent on, let's go to the next slide. You'll select a cash request. So you got to fill in the blue bubble next to the cash request, and then you will click on the button that says Open Request. Biggest mistake that I make on this menu is I click on Open without actually selecting the cash request. And if you don't tell eGrants which cash request you want to look at, eGrants doesn't know what to open, so it doesn't open anything. So make sure that you have selected a cash request first before you click Open. Perfect, thank you. Next slide. So that's all for cash requests. Now I want to kind of talk about amendments a little bit. When you are going through the ESSER grant, this is a unique set of grants because you are allowed to change the way that you are using funds throughout the life of the grant. So maybe back in 2020, when your school was creating the budget for ESSER 1, you said, we want to take this ESSER money and we want to spend it on purchasing iPads for our students for the school. And then we get to 2022, where we are now. It's been 2 years. And you say, you know what, maybe iPads aren't the right decision. Maybe we should do Chromebooks instead or something like that. You can make amendments to your grant. And this is the process that you'll go through. Now, again, we have offered more in-depth training on this process. We've got about a 20-minute video on YouTube and on our website, and that's hyperlinked here in the slide. But I just want to highlight a couple aspects of how to go through amendments. So it's a 5-step process. First thing that you'll do is create the amendment. And then after you create the amendment, you need to unlock the pages so that you can actually make changes. After you unlock the pages, you will make updates in the budget page or the budget pages. After that, you will write an amendment description to really clearly lay out everything that you've changed within that amendment. And then the last thing that you'll do is submit the amendment. So 5 pretty simple steps. Next slide, please. When you are writing your amendment description specifically, I want to highlight this because it makes a huge difference in how easily we can approve your amendment. So part of the challenge with these amendment descriptions is that you have a 500 character limit. That includes every letter plus every space and every punctuation mark that you use. And if you're like me, 500 characters goes very quickly. And so working with some schools over the last year, we have kind of developed this template language that we encourage you to use to keep things really consistent and really concise to describe what you've changed in your amendment. So this template has a few different parts that you need to include. The first thing is from. Which category are you moving money from, and how much money are you moving out of that category? So you can literally just say from category 100/$12,000. And feel free to abbreviate here. You do not need to write out 12000. You can just say 12K, and that's good enough. I know what 12K means. And if, for example, it was like $3,992, that's basically $4,000. You could put 4K there. All right. So feel free to abbreviate here as long as it's still understandable. So you say from, and then you'll do the same thing, but to. If it came from this category, it needs to go to another category, and say which category or categories it's going to and how much money is going into those categories. Next, you'll say what the money is being used to purchase. So for example, if you are moving money from salaries and benefits into supplies in 600, you would say that's being used to purchase iPads, for example. And then the last part of your amendment template is to relate that purchase to the purpose of the grant. So preparing, preventing, or responding to COVID and its effects, as well as how students are benefiting from this expenditure. That's the really important part that we're really trying to drive home here is always bring it back to the students and how students are benefiting from those expenditures. Down at the bottom of the slide here, I do have this same amendment language, but it's colorful. I like to see colors to separate the different parts of the amendment. That helps it make sense to me. Maybe it helps it make sense to you. So red is from, purple is to, blue is what it's being used to purchase, and green is the rationale or the justification of why it relates to COVID and how it benefits the students. This same type of language is what you're going to want to use in your cash requests when you submit those as well. And so we really encourage you to use this same language all the way through the process. Next slide, please. After you make all the changes in your amendment and you fill out that amendment description, the submission process is, there's a couple steps to it. So you'll go to the Submit tab in your application, and before you can submit it, you need to run a consistency check. So you can see in this screenshot here, there's a blue button that says Consistency Check. You will select that. E-Grants will go through the entire application and look for any errors. Now, hopefully there won't be any, but let's say, for example, you made a typo and your budget numbers, they don't add up correctly. So the consistency check will catch that. It'll give you an error message, and you need to go fix that error before you can submit. After the consistency check is clean and it's successful, then you can submit. After you submit, it locks the application, so you won't be able to make any more changes until OPI has gone through and either returned it to you or approved it. And if you are a clerk or business manager and you hit submit, it'll go to your authorized representative, and the authorized representative also needs to submit in order to send it to OPI. So I've gotten a couple phone calls before where it's a clerk or a business manager on the other end, and they say, I submitted an amendment last week and I haven't heard anything from you. Have you gotten my amendment? And we found out that, in fact, it was still sitting with the superintendent, and it hadn't been sent to OPI yet, which is why I hadn't seen it. So just be aware of that, that extra step here in the submit portion. Next slide, please. After you submit an amendment, or if you're just trying to check where the amendment is at in the workflow process, you can see this on the eGrants Access Select page. So next to each application, there is a status column, and there's 5 different statuses that you could possibly see. First one is not submitted. That means you've created it, but it hasn't been submitted yet. Next one is submitted for local review. So that's that situation where clerk or business manager submitted it to the AR, but the AR has not sent it to OPI yet. Next one is submitted to OPI. So that means that you have done everything on your end and it is now on our end to review here at OPI. Then the next status that you could see is final approved. So that means that OPI has approved it and we've returned it to you. You're good to move forward with that purchase. And then the last possible one you could see is returned for changes. So if OPI reviews it and we need you to make some changes based on some feedback, we'll send it back to you, and this is the status that you'll see. So next slide, please. You can also go back and view previous amendments that came before the current amendment that you're working on. I see clerks use this most often when they are trying to see the changes that they made between Amendment 2 and Amendment 3 so that they can write their amendment description. But in order to see the previous amendments, you'll just go to the correct fiscal year for your grant, and then next to the grant that you want to look at, there is a drop-down box where you can click on, right now in the example on the screen, it says Amendment 3. You click on it and it shows Amendment 3, 2, 1, and the original application. So you could go back and see a historical view of any one of those amendments. And sometimes that's helpful, like if you're a new clerk or a new superintendent and you're trying to see what was done in the school district before you got there, that's one way that you could get some historical context. Next slide, please. Circling back to cash requests, I showed you how to look at a cash request that's already been created and paid out, but how do you create your own cash request? Again, up at the top right of this slide, I've got a hyperlink to a more in-depth training that we offered back in September. This is about a 20-minute video that you can click on, and it really goes in depth on cash requests. Again, I'm just touching on the high points with cash requests today. If you need to create a cash request, you'll go to that cash request expenditure report menu. And then instead of clicking to open a request, you'll click on the blue button that says create new request. Once you do that, you will see this kind of middle screenshot on your screen where you see it looks like your budget page, but it's not a budget, it's a cash request. And you have several text boxes or drop-down boxes where you need to fill in information so that you can request those funds. You'll fill in the object code and the use of funds. Those really need to match exactly with your budget, and I'll talk on that in a bit. You'll fill out a description of exactly what is being purchased with this cash request. And then over on the right-hand side, you will put in a dollar amount for how much money you are requesting. After you fill out all those line items, down at the bottom of the cash request, you will need to enter the end period expense date. So for example, if I'm filling out a cash request to reimburse a school for payroll for the month of October, I would say October 31st is the end period expense date. That is going to change depending on when your expenses were incurred, things like that. But that date does need to be entered in there. Otherwise, you can't submit your cash request. Then after you fill everything out, you can select calculate totals at the bottom, and eGrants essentially acts like a calculator and makes sure that everything adds up. You do have an opportunity to upload receipts or pay stubs. This is documentation of exactly what the cash request was being used to purchase. And we do recommend that you use this feature. It's not required, but it is recommended because this helps to establish that audit trail where if an auditor looks at these federal funds for your school, they can see exactly how the budget and the amendments relate to the cash requests, which relates to the receipts that you have submitted. And then once your cash request is fully filled out, any receipts or pay stubs are uploaded, then you will select Save Page. Please make sure you save the page. If you don't save, then all of your changes go away as soon as you leave the screen, which is horrible. So make sure you save the page. Next slide, please. When you are filling out the descriptions within your cash request, again, you do want these descriptions to match what is already in the grant. So again, we encourage you to use that template language that I showed you with amendments where you say, this is what is being purchased and this is how it relates to the grant. So how it prepares, prevents, or responds to COVID and how students are benefiting from it. And we do get the question sometimes, for example, I'm a business clerk. I don't write the grant. I don't make that rationale. And so if you are not the person who's making those decisions on how the funds relate to COVID, copy and paste it from the budget. It's not plagiarism. It just makes it match exactly. And again, that establishes that really clear audit trail. Next slide, please. A big point that I want to drive home here is this use of funds column. If we could zoom in, perfect, thank you. This use of funds column, this is the second column in your cash request. This has to match what is in the budget in your grant application. This is a drop-down box where you select the use of funds. And what happens is when you select that use of funds, E-Grants looks at your budget and it pulls the dollar amount from that use of funds in your budget. If you don't select the right use of funds, like if you select one that doesn't match, E-Grants doesn't have a dollar amount to pull from. And so what you get is in this final approved budget column on the right-hand side, you get $0. That means you have $0 to use to pay for this expenditure. That doesn't work. And so our grant accountants have to return it to you in that case. And I've talked with the grant accountants and they've told me this is like 80% of the reason that cash requests get returned is because someone selected the wrong use of funds. So pay very close attention to the use of funds column and that final approved budget column. Next slide. When you go to submit a cash request, you will, there's a submit tab up at the top of the screen. Similar to amendments, you need to run a consistency check and look for any error messages from E-Grants, and then you will submit. Next slide, please. There is somewhat of a timeline that you do need to be aware of for these amendments and cash requests. And before we get into the specific dates, I do want to say we process hundreds of amendments and cash requests every month. We have over 400 Montana schools and districts and agencies who we are servicing through these grants. And all of these cash requests and amendments take some time to process. So if you submit a cash request or amendment and you don't get an immediate response, it's okay. It just takes a little bit of time. However, if you have submitted a cash request or amendment and it's been a couple of weeks, please feel free to reach out to us. Sometimes we find errors in E-Grants where it went to the wrong person or it got stuck at some point in the process. So don't be afraid to reach out to us, but please just realize there will be a little bit of a delay. If you use that template language I showed you, it makes these much easier to approve, a lot faster of a process. But if we are reviewing amendments or cash requests and we have points of confusion or points where we need clarification, what we will do is we will return it to you and there will be feedback on those cash requests and amendments that you can look at to see what needs to be fixed. Now for the dates. No, go back. Thank you. Cash requests need to be submitted by the 25th of the month in order to be paid out by the 10th of the next month. So right now, today, it is November 17th. The 17th is before the 25th. So if I submitted a cash request today, that's before the 25th. And so that cash request will get processed and paid out by the 10th of the next month, which is December. However, if we get to November 28th, for example, that's after the 25th. At that point, there's no guarantee that that cash request is going to be processed and paid out by the 10th of December. Now, November is an interesting example because the 25th is the day after Thanksgiving. And I've already gotten this question today. I have Thanksgiving off. What if I don't get that cash request submitted by the 28th? In that case, our grant accountants are going to do their very best to process all of those cash requests and amendments or cash requests. But if it is after the 25th, again, there is no guarantee that it'll be processed before the 10th of the month. They do take time to process. All right. So as much as possible, please try to get those cash requests in before you leave for Thanksgiving break. And then as far as amendments go, there is no submission deadline for amendments, but you do need to have an amendment submitted and approved before a cash request that is related to that amendment can be approved. So for example, if I was going to move money from budget code 600 into budget codes 100 and 200, and I submit the amendment and I immediately submit the cash request, that cash request cannot be processed until the amendment gets approved. So if you do need to make an amendment before you submit a cash request, please keep that in mind and just be proactive in getting those submitted and approved before the 25th of the month. Next slide, please. Now, as far as finding the feedback, I've got two different slides here, an amendment slide and a cash request slide because they're a little bit different. But when OPI returns a application, so an amendment or a cash request to you, and we leave feedback, sometimes it's hard to find that feedback. And so this is how you do that. On the E-Grants Access Select page next to the application. So for example, if you were looking at ESSER 2, ESSER Consolidated, you would go to the E-Grants Access Select page, and instead of clicking Open, you would click on Review Summary. This will pull up this menu, and if we could zoom in a little bit, please. At the bottom left of your screen, there is a review summary that shows you the different steps of the review process that this application has gone through. And so what you will do is you will select the OPI step, the SEA, State Final Agency Review, and then you'll click on the button that says Review Checklist. This will open a second tab in your browser. And this only works if your pop-up blocker is turned off. So the biggest issue that we run into here is you have a pop-up blocker, you did all the right steps, but your review checklist didn't pop up. And so you do need to make sure you got your pop-up blocker turned off. I'll give you some information on that here in a couple slides. But after it opens that review checklist tab on the right-hand bottom side of your screen right now, this is an example of some feedback that we've left. You can see we've left feedback on Amendment 1, 2, and 3, and you can see the initials of the person who left that feedback. So Wendy and I, we always try to leave our initials so you know who reviewed your amendment. Next slide, please. The cash request process is similar, but you get to it from a different spot. So to find feedback on a cash request, you'll go into that payment summary menu, you'll look at your cash request, you'll select the cash request that you want to view feedback for, and then instead of clicking open, you'll click on review summary. Then you got to select the accountant and click on review checklist. It opens a second tab. You got to have pop-up blockers turned off, but then again, you have this review checklist where you can see our feedback if we've left any. Next slide, please. Turning off pop-up blockers. I know this looks like a lot of text. Don't freak out. I'm not going to go in depth on this, but we have offered training on this before. We have these PDFs that are linked at the bottom of this slide, as well as they're posted on the E-Grants login page. And they just take you through step-by-step how to go through and turn off your pop-up blockers in Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. Those are the two browsers that work the best with E-Grants, and so that is where we have the most support for you. Before you turn off your pop-up blockers, though, please just check with your school IT or security policy and make sure that you're following the steps that are needed for your school or district so that you're not introducing security issues. So just double check with your IT person before you turn off your pop-up blockers. That's all. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to kind of jump into some common E-Grants error messages that I have seen in the last month. Now, by no means is this an exhaustive list. We offered some training last month in October when Mindy came in and offered very detailed feedback on lots of different error messages. I'm only going to cover a few of them today, but that video is linked on this slide that you can watch on your own time if you'd like. These red error messages in E-Grants, they will display at the top of your screen. Please read them carefully. They are written in such a way that you should be able to figure out what needs to be fixed so that you can move forward with your application. Before panicking, before calling OPI, there's a few things that you can do to make sure that you are making E-Grants work well. And the first one, make sure you're using Chrome or Microsoft Edge as a browser. Those are the two browsers that work the best with E-Grants. Next, make sure your browsing history is cleared. For whatever reason, sometimes any like cookies or things in your browsing history, they will cause issues with E-Grants. So if E-Grants is acting really weird, just clear your browser history. And then the last thing is please make sure your pop-up blockers are off, and that will solve quite a few of those problems. Now let's jump into some error messages. Two places that error messages are going to appear. The first one is on the individual tabs or pages within your grant application. You'll see an error message up at the top, up above those blue tabs. So this one here on the screen says, enter a summer phone for the authorized representative. And you can see down below, there's no summer phone that's been entered there. So again, those are phrased so that you can figure out exactly what needs to be fixed. Next slide. The other place that error messages are going to appear is on the Submit tab. So when you go to Submit, when you run a consistency check, if there are any errors within your application, when you run that consistency check, they will pop up on that Submit tab, and you will not be able to submit your application until those errors have been resolved. Next slide, please. A really common error message that we see is that the page is locked. And so to fix this, you will need to go to the Page Lock Control tab, which is usually on the right-hand side of all of your tabs within the E-Grants application. You'll click on the Page Lock Control tab. It'll open up this menu. And in this menu, you can either select the specific pages that you want to unlock, or you can just select all the pages and unlock all of them at once. So you'll click the checkbox next to Expand All, click the checkbox next to Select All to select all of those pages. And then the last step, very important, you gotta click the Save button all the way down at the bottom of the screen. If you don't click the Save button, your pages will not be unlocked when you navigate away from the page. So you gotta make sure you save those changes. Next slide. Another place that pages may be locked is on the Submit tab. When you run a consistency check, it automatically locks all those pages. And so you'll have to select the Unlock Application button if you need to go back and make changes. So that's another place where you can unlock the pages. Next slide. Another error message that I've seen recently is that the budget totals are not equal the total allocation. And so in this screenshot here at the bottom of your slide, you can see that the total budgeted above, so this is circled in letter F. Total budgeted above is 5.2 million. But if you look over on the left-hand side in A, it says the total allocation is 5.5 million. So there's a difference there that hasn't been accounted for in the budget, and that'll show up in this allocation remaining section at the bottom right. That allocation remaining should be $0 before you submit. That means that there are $0 left for you to budget within this budget page. But in this example, that allocation remaining section says $140,000. So there's $140,000 there that still needs to be allocated in the budget. So pay attention to that. And next slide. Another one, and this has been a tricky one that I had to learn, is that the amount budgeted for property and equipment under Object Code 700 should equal the total cost of all items. Now, the first time I saw this one, I was so confused because the allocation remaining on the budget page was $0. And the clerk and I, we were looking at it going, I don't know how to fix this. And so we got Mindy in the room, and Mindy said, oh, there's another budget tab that you have to go to for specifically Object Code 700. So Object Code 700, that is property and equipment. Those are large purchases, like for example, if you are installing an HVAC unit, which would be a large purchase, that would go in Object Code 700. And when you put something in Object Code 700, that also needs to be filled out on the property and equipment tab within that budget page. So you click on the property and equipment tab. If we could zoom in here, please. The gray box next to amount budgeted for property and equipment under code 700, that gets auto-populated by E-Grants. E-Grants pulls in that dollar amount from your budget page. And then you just need to create line items to describe those purchases within Object Code 700. And those line items need to add up to that total amount budgeted for Object Code 700. So just pay attention to that. I've only seen that a couple times, and the first time it really confused me. So make sure that that is equal there. Next slide, please. And then I did just want to show you here, this is a screenshot of a consistency check that was run and some error messages that got pulled up after this consistency check. So towards the top, you see an ESSER Consolidated and ESSER Base. There are errors that need to be fixed before you can submit that application. But at the bottom, School District Supplemental, it says passed consistency check. That means you did a good job. There's no error there that you need to fix. And so don't panic when you see red text at the top of your screen. It's just there to help you understand what needs to happen next. Next slide, please. All right, we're going to start wrapping up here. I've been talking for a while. I did want to highlight some resources that we have for you at opi.mt.gov. That is our OPI website. Again, on the right-hand side of your screen, I've got this screenshot of where you can find the link to eGrants, as well as I have it hyperlinked on your slide. And then when you go to opi.mt.gov, I have circled the ESSER button. There's a big blue ESSER button that'll take you to our ESSER webpage. It has lots of information for you about the ESSER grants. We recently redesigned that webpage and made it a little bit easier to navigate and find what you're looking for. But if you are looking around and you can't find what you're looking for, just give us a call or shoot us an email and we'll help you find it. The last thing I want to point out here is below that ESSER button, there is a broadband button. And OPI has a broadband initiative where we are integrating several different grants, including the ESSER grant, into helping Montanans increase their access to broadband connectivity. And so we're going to post a link in the chat here. We have a very quick survey. It is 3 questions to kind of gauge where your broadband connectivity is at. So if you have just a moment after this session, if you could do that 3-question survey. And then if you want more information about the types of grants and funding that you can use for improving your broadband connectivity, that's that big blue button on the OPI webpage there. So if we could go to the last slide. I've got contact information here on the slide for myself and Wendy. We can help you with any ESSER questions that you may have. And I've also got contact information for Mindy Askelson. She is our E-Grants designer, and she is a pro at E-Grants. She works with all of the different grants that are in E-Grants, and she does a lot of technical support as well as designing those grants. Some of you who've been around a while, you may remember when Mindy was in my position and Mindy was helping with the ESSER grant, but now she is in a slightly different role where she is focusing on E-Grants. So if you have ESSER questions, come to me or Wendy. If you have E-Grants questions, go to Mindy. At this point, I'd like to open it up for question and answer. Thank you so much for being with me this afternoon.